Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's 12:30, so right on time and we'll start. Now, welcome to the Australian War Memorial and welcome to our brand new theatre. My name is Dr. Carl James and I'm the Head of Military History here at the Memorial. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners on the land on which we meet today, the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people, and pay my respects to elders past and present. We're very excited this afternoon to welcome author Michael Veitch to speak about his new book on the OBOE operations in Borneo in 1945, Australia's brilliant and yet controversial end to the Second World War. Before we start, however, I ask that you please be mindful of the following courtesies for the comfort and safety of all of our visitors. Please be aware that food and drink except water are not permitted in the theatre or in the memorial's galleries. And please turn your mobile phones to silent. The fire exits are located behind you to the rear of the room. And in the event of an evacuation, please follow the directions of memorial staff. The bathrooms are located outside of the theatre, beyond the shop and the cloaking room, so outside and towards your left. And memorial staff will be very helpful to provide any further information or assistance if required. Now, Michael's presentation this afternoon, titled Borneo, the Last Campaign, is part of the Memorial's ongoing program of commemorative events and activities to mark the 80th anniversary of the end of the Second World War. And this program has included 3 monthly author talks, a season of the play 21 Hearts, Vivian Bullwinkle and the Nurses of the Viner Brook, and a special half-day symposium entitled Interpreting Australia's Second World War, previewing Anzac Hall. And this symposium is now on the Memorial's YouTube channel. And there is also currently a photographic exhibition on display in Level 1 titled Victory in the Pacific. I'd now like to introduce Michael Veitch. Michael began his career in the 1980s writing and performing television comedy for the classic programs The D-Generation and Fast Forward. He's also worked as a newspaper columnist, a TV and radio broadcaster, and a playwright. He's a best-selling author and has now published 13 books, including Flak, The Battle of the Bismarck Sea, 44 Days, and now Borneo, the Last Campaign. And if this isn't enough, in 2020, Michael was joined the Air Force as a Special Reserve Capability Officer, joining the History and Heritage branch with the rank of Wing Commander. And that's why Michael's in his funny uniform today, or fancy uniform. It's not funny, fancy uniform. And as we also learned in Borneo, Michael also once tamed the formidable Victorian President of the RSL, Bruce Ruxton. But to hear those details, you'll have to read his book. So please welcome Michael Veitch.
Thank you. Thank you. What a lovely introduction, and thank you so much. I'm so chuffed you've turned up on this lovely Canberra afternoon. I am in uniform for a reason. I actually am working as part of my other job with Air Force, with the History and Heritage branch. Doing a bit of teaching over at ADFA this week. So here I'm in Canberra, and wonderful to be here in this extraordinary new theatre. Isn't it beautiful? Wow. I think I'm going to write a play just so I can put it on here. That'd be great. Well, as I said, lovely to see you, and thank you for that. This has been the hardest book I've ever written. It's the longest by about 5,000 or 6,000 words. My fascination with Australia in the Pacific, and it's so timely we're doing it now, because today's Battle for Australia Day, the war ended 80 years ago yesterday. It's so timely this week, and this story spreads over this period, right at the end of the war. I started writing, and I can't do another one because I've run out of war now. My first book was on the air defence of Moresby, the David and Goliath battle, with the newly formed 75 Squadron hurling their Kitty Hawks against the Betty Bombers and Zeros over Moresby before the Kokoda campaign even got going. Turning Point, Japan's first, people forget this so much, particularly the Americans, the first defeat of Japan on land was by us at Milne Bay. A few months later, a combined air operation turning the Japanese convoy destined to Lae, which would have possibly prolonged the war in New Guinea by a year, was the estimations. That was obliterated by aircraft alone, in the course of about 20 minutes in the middle of the ocean, just off New Guinea. But fast forward to this one here, Borneo, the last campaign. Brilliant, controversial end to World War II. Well, why have I said that? Because why was it brilliant and why was it controversial? Brilliant because it was a flawlessly executed military campaign on a grand scale, the largest amphibious campaign we have ever executed, far exceeding anything we did right at the end of the war. It worked brilliantly. It achieved all its objectives. It was much, much harder than anyone thought it was going to be, and we'll go into that in a bit. Controversial because historically, most historians, and I'm not a historian, I'm a storyteller. I'm in great admiration of historians, but I'm not one. Historians argue that it was completely unnecessary and didn't even need to happen, and you can put up a very strong argument to that. So where are we 80 years ago, plus a few months in our part of the world? Let's have a look. So, is this thing working? Here we are down here, of course. The extent of Japan's empire in the Southwest Pacific extending to here, Midway. They wanted to push it to about here in Hawaii. If they'd won Midway, they would have gone way up there as well. That's why they wanted to lure the American fleet out and smashed them at Midway. Well, the Americans turned the tables and sunk their aircraft carriers instead. After that, what happened? They withdrew and concentrated more around this area, Milne Bay in August of 1942. Then what happened, as the great juggernaut of the United States got going, the war, as we all know, I don't have to tell you people this, the war kind of moved up to here with the American Navy taking this section here. The bizarre way the Americans divided their command between the Central Pacific and the Southwest Pacific, MacArthur Army, Nimitz Navy, you all know that. MacArthur wanted to do this. He wanted to go to Japan this way through the Philippines, and the Americans wanted to go this way, hop, 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 all the way to Japan, and they kind of, all coalesced at the end of the war. What about us? What about Australia? The people who had first come up against the might of Japan when they were at their prime, at their zenith in August 1942, or in the months before August 1942 as well. Well, of course, as we know, MacArthur was chucked out of the Philippines very early in 1942, quite controversially, a humiliation he never got over. Even after the war, he was still stung by it with his I shall return. He eventually did return, but it never assuaged his guilt, apparently, according to the biographies, about what he felt about having to leave his people on the Philippines, even though he was ordered directly to do so. We know about MacArthur, a peculiar person. I think that's an understatement. Even most American military historians acknowledge that now. Pretty early, MacArthur was pretty determined to see that the only country that was going to get the glory for defeating Imperial Japan was the Americans, even though we had done a lot and geographically we were in the centre of things, particularly early in the war. The war progressed, of course. Australia fought brilliantly in the Middle East, brought our 2 7th and 9th divisions back. We did some sort of, mucking around here on the north coast of New Guinea in 1943, places like Shaggy Ridge and Saddleburg, and then we sort of hopped along, hopped along the New Guinea coast for a while. Finchhaven up there, a relatively large amphibious invasion, as the war kind of gradually got pushed back north and here. And there was a point where the Australian Army basically did nothing for a whole year. Nothing except train somewhere around here, near Cairns, a little bit further south on the Atherton Tablelands, between late 1994, between the winding up of the New Guinea campaign and Borneo, we didn't do anything. And it was very strange. We had a whole army corps essentially training in Queensland for a campaign that nobody knew was even going to come. And we lobbied very hard for the Americans. It was as strange as what I begin the story with. We campaigned very hard for Australia to be included in the final push to Japan. We felt we deserved it. We felt that if we staked our claim in the Pacific, like after World War I, we would receive a seat at the table, as we did in Versailles. 60,000 Australians perished in the First World War. We thought that was our right, particularly as this war was in our backyard, not in Europe. MacArthur did make voluminous promises about, I've got it in the book somewhere, all these back and forth conversations and telegrams and promises and meetings about how he was going to take the Australian First Army Corps with him into the Philippines, into Mindanao, and they're going to be an adjunct and a vital force of pushing the Japanese back through the Philippines. I'm rather glad we didn't, actually. It would have been a bloody bloodbath. But it didn't happen. He didn't really want that to happen. It was all too inconvenient and messy. The Australians became more and more disgruntled by this. Blamey particularly became, another very controversial figure. There's a new book been written about Blamey just out, which reassesses his very poor image, which I'm very looking forward to read. But finally, towards the late 1944, early 1945, it was decided that the Australians would not be joining the United States, pushing its way up through Mindanao and then to the rest of the Philippines, but they would concentrate on this area here. The vast island, Japanese-occupied island of Borneo, oil-rich, magnificently oil-rich. That was one of the attractions to the Japanese when they invaded it. Almost first on their list of the Dutch East Indies possessions was Borneo, because it had massive oil reserves, which they indeed needed to exploit and indeed did for a while. The other reason why MacArthur was happy for us to go there, well, several reasons. It was a sideshow. Australians were happy. They wouldn't get in the way too much. They wouldn't complain about not having anything to do. And it was also a former European colony. President Roosevelt was very, very uncomfortable. The chiefs of staff were very uncomfortable about United States forces being seen to re-establish European colonies. It went against the American edict of freedom and blah, 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 all the rest of it. They proudly professed not to have colonies, and they didn't on paper officially agree with them, but there you go. So they didn't wonder, but Australia, having been a former colony, a series of colonies herself, has said this is just the job for you. So we did. It was called OBOE. It was originally going to be 6 OBOE operations, OBOEs 1 to 6. OBOE 1, only 3 took place. 3 were, thank goodness, scrubbed. 3 were ridiculous. One of the OBOE operations was to sail into Java, an enormous Japanese stronghold, and try and take that. Completely ridiculous. Another was to attack the Celebes, the base on the Celebes Island here. Another one was to attack this Bergam, I can't pronounce it. It's this oil-rich port, similar to Balikpapan, but a bit smaller. So they cut those back and agreed that OBOE would be a staged series of amphibious operations against the combined Dutch and British-held island of Borneo over 3 months, May, June, July 1945. It came down to OBOE 1, OBOE 6, and OBOE 2. OBOE 1 was the island of Tarakan, that little tiny island right there, almost swimming in oil. I think it's all gone now. I think they've got all the oil out. That's why they wanted that one, plus there was an airstrip on it. British North Borneo, the only part of the British Empire that was taken on Borneo. This is Sarawak. British North Borneo was divided into this area here, Sarawak, Brunei, and I think, yeah, and North Borneo itself. So the British had this half of a third of the island, say, and the Dutch had the rest. Borneo's huge. It's the size of New South Wales. It's a massive place. All virgin jungle, much of which has been sadly deforested now, but that's another story. So when Australia got word that they were going to be involved in this final big push of the war, they were very, very happy. The Australian First Army Corps was reorganised. A lot of the old veterans were sent home. A lot of them didn't want to be sent home, but a lot were cashiered out. And a lot of new young men were inducted into the army. And so for many, many, many Australian soldiers and servicemen and women, Borneo became their one and only campaign of the war. And that's why it holds a special resonance for me, I think, because it was in many ways terribly flawed, not in its execution, but in its political aims and its military aims. And one of the reasons it's been sort of forgotten is because of that. It was a shame that such a brilliant military operation occurred right at the end of the war, when it was all more or less a foregone conclusion. Japan was in the throes of being defeated when this campaign began. B-29 bombers obliterating Japanese cities. By the time I think the second OBOE operation got underway, the great American battles up in those islands of Saipan and Iwo Jima were done and dusted. The Philippines campaign was winding up. The Philippines campaign started in late 1944, and petered out around, I think it was May or June or July or something like that. I'm sure there are people in the audience that know more about the military history in that dates and things than I do. So they went ahead. Let's see what we got here. Let's talk about Tarakan, OBOE 1. This is what that tiny little, I'll just show you where that is again. It's there. It's that little blip there. That's where it is. So it's actually off the coast of Borneo on the mouth of these big rivers. So it's sort of in an estuary. And this is what it looked like. One of the on-paper reasons, well, the two main on-paper reasons was this airstrip here and these oil fields here, and there was some more at Lingus too. The Australians went in, the first battalions of OBOE 1 went in at Lingus on the morning, I think, of the 1st of May 1945 to a prelude of bombardment and aerial naval and air bombardment, which was completely unprecedented. Of course, it was not a uniquely Australian operation. It was an Australian-American operation. Almost no American personnel on the ground, but certainly it was facilitated by the United States Navy, who worked in great cooperation with the Australians. This is, I think, actually approaching. Yes, this is approaching one of the beaches. I think there was M10. That's no. This is Tarakan. This is Tarakan on the first morning, probably late in the day because the smoke's cleared. This beach was obliterated in a way that the Australians were absolutely shocked by. A lot of the young men in their diaries later said even the bombardment we'd experienced in training, and it was quite extensive, and the demonstrations we were subject to, nothing prepared us to what we actually envisaged on that morning. This is on their way in one of the American landing craft, an LCI, I think. Is it an LCI? Yes, someone will know it's an LCI, I think, landing craft infantry with the American flag there, up the top there. They sailed for Morotai, about a week's sailing away. Morotai, the Japanese-held island that had been taken with relative ease and turned into a massive American base with two adjacent airstrips, one for bombers, one for fighters, about a week's sailing over to the east, just north of, in the Halmahera Island group. There's the convoy, as one sailor said, as one of the soldiers said, you couldn't see the end of it and you couldn't see the beginning of it. in all, I'll just give this scale, 80,000 soldiers alone were deployed in the three Borneo invasions. Something like 10 battalions, 10 full battalions, some of which had seen great service already in the Middle East, but now are populated with a mixture of veterans and green young men, particularly green young officers who had never seen action before. So even the old guard thought that it was kind of weird. They didn't know anybody anymore. The old camaraderie had kind of dropped off because so many people, well, particularly after the Middle East, so many people were killed, but it had all kind of come together in a different way. I love this photograph. These are the sappers. The Japanese had fortified all the beaches. They knew where the Allies were going to come, and they fortified them to the best of their abilities with hundreds and hundreds of mines laid very cleverly, usually on almost horizontal bamboo poles pushing into the water. And these fellas went in a day before under fire and had to clear every single one of those mines and then clear something like a 60, 70 metre path to enable the landing craft to come up to the beach. And they had to do it at low tide. And on each occasion where the sappers went in, it was in broad daylight. But they had to go in. It was the only time where the orders came through, casualties will be sustained. And we are happy to see that, because the job of clearing these mines and preparing the beach for the invasion is absolutely vital. Contrary to that, though, the message coming down from the High Australian Command was try and keep casualties to a minimum. We are aware that Japan will be defeated, but we've been ordered to take this island, so take it we will. But we want to avoid unnecessary casualties. It will become very unpalatable at home if too many young men are killed this close to the end of the war. But I love that photo. They're covered in oil, and the oil was just simply leaking out of this island. The soldiers talked about walking through the bush and the jungle, and their boots would be black with raw oil. The oil was so pure on Tarakan. The Dutch established the oil facilities as part of their empire, sort of going back to the late 19th century and early 20th century. The oil was so pure, it could be pumped directly from the ground into the fuel tanks of some ships, and they would sail off happy. It had a very high sulfur content, so it did corrode the fuel tanks apparently, but that's a different story. So these guys have just spent a couple of days crawling through sand and mud. This fella has a rope which he would have been around his waist, because often they were crawling in mud. Often they got stuck, and at the end of the rope was a landing craft which basically reversed and pulled him out of the mud and the muck, and so he could try again. I just love that photograph. This is what some of the invasion beaches were looking like as the soldiers were approaching them. I don't have the list of battalions in front of me. It's 2nd 48th and 2nd 43rd and 2nd 10th, a lot from South Australia. A lot of these fellows were from Western Australia. It was split between, was mainly the 9th Division, but the 7th Division, I think, went in at OBOE too. But it was a spectacular bombardment supplied by the warships of the United States Navy and our own Air Force. So spectacular was the bombardment that it actually ended up destroying the very two things they were sent into Borneo to take, which was the oil facilities and the airstrip. We'll get to that in a moment. Labuan Beach, I'm jumping ahead. This is Borneo 6, which was British North Borneo. But this is what it looked like. Beaches were shredded. Soldiers coming in landing crafts. Remember seeing entire Japanese concrete pillboxes spinning in the air. They said, "What the hell's that, Mac?" And so I think it's a 15-ton piece of concrete spinning in the air. Trees ripped out and tumbling around like twigs and sticks. They'd prepared very well for it. The Australian Army had done a few quite revolutionary things in the prelude to Borneo. All the soldiers went through Morotai, as I said. They built fabulous 3D often a half an acre, like as big as this room, 3D maps of the beaches they were going to assault. With every tree and every building, there were little mosques and churches and huts, and so they would get into their head and they would know exactly what they were going into. But it was so ripped to pieces by the bombardment, they couldn't recognise anything half the time. That's Balikpapan Beach. So amazing hardware here. This is a duck, an American duck. This is a wonderful thing, the alligator. One of the Americans had another name for them, but they were this wonderful amphibious thing which could go hull down, sink far further into the water than a duck could, but it could hold about 30 men and 2 machine gunners on the top, and these tracks had sort of cleats on them that it would spin and push the craft forward. And the Australians were very impressed by that, and was all crewed by the American 693rd Beach Deployment Company, and they did an absolutely fabulous job. But this is what the beaches look like. The landings themselves were all pretty successful. The Japanese, of course, what they had always planned to do was to not contest the beach, but to go inland. And this is where the story of all Borneo gets very, very interesting, because they'd been told that it might be an inland fight, but they had no idea to what extent this would prove to be true on all the 3 Borneo landing beaches. The fight devolved from a relatively easy beach assault to a very difficult bloody slog inland, when the Japanese retreated to their prepared positions. Another beach shot there. I kind of like this brilliant action shot there. Was smoke everywhere. Everything stank, apparently. The smell of oil was disgusting. And soldiers said the only good thing about having oil everywhere was there was no malaria, because there was no mosquitoes, because the oil kept the mosquitoes away. Another landing craft tank, or landing ship tank, disgorging that's a Humber, I think. That looks to me like a photographic unit, like a darkroom. I'm pretty sure it is, and I reckon that photographer took a photo of his mates coming ashore with a darkroom that he'd soon be working in. Here we are. The tides were nuts. Look at this tide. This thing is completely beach. They chose for the invasion the highest. That's why they put them a month apart, because they wanted the high tides. So, of course, they land on the high tide. What happens when a high tide goes out? Doesn't come back in again for a long time. It was something like, hundreds of metres of muddy shoreline, and this ship was apparently stuck for about 2 months, till after the war, till they could get it off again. Preparations there. As soon as they got there, they started preparing the inland. More coming ashore. There's another Australian photographer. Very interesting. We'll talk about this. This is an Australian Matilda. The Matildas were great. Not the best tank of World War II, like everything British of that era, completely over-engineered, but fine for us, particularly in the flamethrower version we developed later in the war, which we called rather ominously the Frog. And the Frog was a terrifying weapon that we used later in this campaign. Everywhere the Australians, as they pushed inland, were faced by what the Japanese had prepared, and it was nuts. The Japanese had deployed thousands and thousands of everything they could get their hands on that could explode, and explode they did, including, this is a bloody sea mine, half buried in the earth, ready to go. These things can take out half a block. But this is what they found time and time again. Mines in tandem, mines cleverly put up to things like, the Japanese were so clever in how they prepared it. They would keep a lot of the telegraph wires intact, and they would cut it at a certain point where they knew a truck could back up and a bloke could stand on the roof of the truck and fix it. Where do you think they concealed a mine? Right under that telegraph post. But hand grenades, aerial bombs, they reverted to actually fusing a bomb. It's kind of crazy when you think about it. They would fuse an aerial bomb, carry it over their shoulders, and rush up to a tank and slam it against the tank to blow it up. Of course, they blew themselves up as well, but that was what they were prepared to do. Did not have much effect because it didn't have any armor-piercing quality. It was simply an explosion outside a tank. But there you go. This is what the sort of thing the Australians had not expected to find. They were told that the whole Borneo exercise would be something like a difficult exercise rather than an actual military campaign. Those are the very words that were used. But instead they found these sorts of things, these massively reinforced concrete pillboxes, all of which they had to take. Some was like World War I fighting, some was like trenches. And what happened, the Australians had their objectives. They would push forward from the beach, where on every part of Borneo and all three oboes, the terrain devolved into a series of messy, high ridges, gullies, jungle valleys that were very hard to hold and even harder to take. But the Australians took them, they did. This is what the fighting looked like. This is a Matilda on a jungle track. Snipers were everywhere, of course. They didn't know where these Japanese were coming from. They were told they were only a few half-starved second, third-rate soldiers, which was true. They were half-starved second, third-rate soldiers, but they continued to fight with a tenacity that utterly bewildered the Australians. They had conversations like, but they're beaten. I know what the Japanese are like. We fought them 2 years ago. But they know they're beaten. How can they still be fighting? And there's no answer to that question either. A couple of the quotes, later historians said, only the soldiers of Imperial Japan would fight like this, knowing that there was no hope. But fight, they did. That's a real wonderful shot there. And they're crouching behind because there were snipers everywhere. Okay, I had the great privilege, I wish I had a picture of him, of meeting... I'll go back a bit. There are battles in this campaign of which I had never heard of. One of them was a thing called Veitch Knoll. And it was a few days after the invasion of Balikpapan, which was the third and final invasion launched against the oil refinery area of Balikpapan, and they pushed up to an airstrip and had to take the airstrip. The Japanese had prepared the airstrip with mines and then had established field guns in the hills overlooking it. That airstrip needed to be used. Those field guns had to be taken, and the only way they could be taken was for people like Les Cook to go up and take them. Les Cook is still alive. He lives about 5 kilometres from here. He's 103 years old. He told me a wonderful story about this 3-day slog in pouring rain in the last few weeks of the war. He told this wonderful story to me about 2 years ago when I was interviewing him as 101. Now he's 101, 103 or whatever he is now. This was his final battle of the war, of course. So Veitch Knoll was simply a ridge about 2 kilometres from the airstrip that they had taken that day, but were being fired upon. He climbed up to the top with his battalion, the 2nd 10th, or a company from his 2nd 10th battalion, in these precipitous ridges, like spurs of rock and ground where only fit 2 or 3 people abreast, and there were valleys and gullies. It was like a maze, and the Japanese had very cleverly put railway field guns and dug holes over the past couple of years, and they had steel doors over it. They'd fire, close the doors, and then push the gun back. They had to be taken almost one by hand. Les Cook told me about this being given charge packs, haversacks full of pick-right explosive. They said, look, the best thing to do is just run up to the holes, chuck them in, put a fuse on it, and then run away. And he said, you know, all these advancements of military technology over the years of the Second World War, and it's back to blokes chucking dynamite at each other was his reflection. He spent 2 nights up on this ridge, keeping an eye on the Japanese. I couldn't have seen them in the daytime, but at night they all came out. Napalm was used for the first time. They called it gelatrol back then. Les and his mates didn't know what it was. They thought they'd dropped their petrol or something, the aeroplanes above. But one morning after this dreadful torrential rain and fending off several Japanese attacks, he was up on a ridge next to a tree trunk, and he was sort of groggy and half asleep. And he's about 50 metres above where his officer and his little command post is, and he hears a voice, "Excuse me, mate, have you got time for a photo?" And he looked around and there was a press photographer right next to him, and Les goes, "Oh, whatever," and there's his Bren gun there, and he posed for that picture. So that's the picture that was taken of Les Cook at the Battle of Waits Knoll by a very eager press photographer. The Bren gun was a fabulous weapon used by the Australians. That's it there. This is another application of it on Borneo somewhere. But it was jungle, it was unbearable humidity, it was leeches, it was just basically horrible. They discovered extraordinary things. This was a Dutch pillbox that the Japanese had, that the Dutch had built, and as you can see, it's upside down because a Royal Australian Air Force bomb, probably from a Liberator, bombed it and tipped it over during the bombardment. So the Australians were fascinated by these. The Japanese tried to use them on the coast, but only had a couple of men. This was a big Japanese command post at, I think that was on Tarakan. That's where the Japanese colonial-style buildings that the Japanese occupied. Lots of Japanese barracks there as well. Cole, this is a lovely story. The day after the Balikpapan invasion, some blokes who were down near the beaches after they'd been secured, and this big, fancy landing craft turns up, and there's flash bulbs, flash, 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 and press photographers are everywhere. And Douglas MacArthur turns up with General Morshead. And that's a guy called Mervyn Jeans, who was a pure soldier. And he was said, he was actually pulled back from the battle to escort these two celebrities. And you can see how happy he is to be doing so. And apparently he was really grumpy and rude to Douglas MacArthur and even his boss, Leslie Morshead. And you can see by the expression on his face that all he wants to do is to get back to fighting the Japanese. That's Mervyn Jeans. Civilians began to pour in from everywhere they invaded. And look how thin they are. A lot of them had been incredibly cruelly treated by the Japanese over the past 4 or 5 years. And you can see, and that was one of the used as a storehouse by the Japanese. I think that's inland from in Labuan somewhere in North Borneo. You can see the bullet and shell holes in it. But then these civilians who had often had their houses wrecked by Australian bombardment. It was very indiscriminate. Even though I'm wearing this uniform, Oboe and Borneo is not the Royal Australian Air Force's finest hour by any means. They just had a thing called the Morotai Mutiny, where a lot of the top Australian aces over in Morotai were saying, what are you doing this for? This is silly, the war's over, and we're doing these silly mop-up operations, and we're sick of it, we want to go home. And they threatened to mutiny, and they sort of mutinied, but sort of didn't, and there was going to be a court-martial, but they didn't want to do that either. So very, very low morale, incredibly low morale. The morale got even worse when they discovered what we'd done to the Tarakan airstrip, which is the reason we'd sent these soldiers there in the first place. Look at it. I'm trying to land a plane on that. And these are all Australian bombs and American bombs. So the first absurdity was that the Australian engineers discovered when they pushed up to the Tarakan airstrip was that, well, what are we supposed to do with this? We can't use it. Added to that, it was almost below the waterline. They're all waterlogged because that's the sea. And at high tide, virtually, this thing was underwater. And it couldn't be fixed. This airstrip was to be used at Tarakan as a forward base for the subsequent 2 operations happening a month hence and 2 months hence. It was found to be completely useless. They worked day and night to try and fix it, but they could not. I have to move on. There it is, a close-up again. Absolutely wrecked by our own hands. Another reason why the Royal Australian Air Force was not particularly popular during the Borneo operations. And there was no Japanese Air Force to contend with in any case. This is what it was like trying to land. That's when they did eventually, planes tried to come in on Tarakan airstrip. This is a 75 squadron, I think, Kitty Hawk coming in, and they'll just skid off the runway. They put this Marsden matting down, which was metal interlocked steel perforated sheets of metal. They can make a runway anywhere, but the water came up through it. So planes would just take off in this spew of water and they couldn't see anything and they'd slip around. pushing inland from one of the beaches. I think this is Balikpapan. Equipment being used. That's a radio, walkie-talkies being used, I think, for the first time. Sometimes they worked, sometimes they didn't. I love this shot of a Matilda coming up into the oil refinery of Balikpapan, roaring up there. Unfortunately, what happened, like the airstrips, I've jumped ahead a bit. I'll go back to that. This is what they found. These are oil tanks. These are refinery equipment. They were all smashed too. They were useless. There was nothing left. That's another one. Look at that oil tank. It's sort of, they caught fire and all the metal melted and they sunk like a balloon. So these blokes have fought their way up here and going, well, our objective was the oil storage. This is called the tank farm. I think it was behind Lingus Beach on Tarakan, but found it was all basically wrecked. So fighting inland, I'm jumping around a bit. Do excuse me because we're limited with time here. This is a Matilda tank that was turned into a terrifying weapon, which was found to be one of the only things that could extricate the Japanese, who were very well dug in up on these high ridges. And if you could get one up, the only way to get them out was this thing was called, as I said before, a frog, especially invented by Australian Army engineers to be a flame-throwing tank. The Brits in Europe had used the Churchill flame-throwing tank, but for tank nuts amongst us, of which I'm not really one, I know that it carried its fuel in a special trailer behind the vehicle. You couldn't do that in the Pacific, the tracks that weren't good enough. So they worked out a way of having it, the fuel inside the tank. It could spray burning fuel in short or long bursts, but it ran out pretty quickly. But it was a dreadful and terrifying and deadly effective weapon. Before we move on, in North Borneo, the story of the Dayaks and what our Z Special Forces did, what our commandos did, is a wonderful story. Christine Helliwell wrote a book a couple of years ago, a brilliant book called Semut, about the story of how the Dayak army, I've entitled my chapter this tiny army of the brave. The Australian commandos were sent in a couple of months before Borneo, before the landings happened, with no pre-warning to the Dayak people. The Dayak's a bit of a lazy term. There are 200 or so separate tribes all through the northern part of Borneo, all the different cultures, slightly in different dialects. But nobody quite knew what their reaction was going to be to Australian soldiers turning up and saying, hey, do you want to help us fight the Japanese? And they were told, these guys that parachuted in, look, your reception will either be one or two things. Either they'll be delighted to see you, or else they'll hand you over to the Japanese, or else they'll behead you, because they're headhunters and they really like doing that. And they were stopped doing that about 30 years ago, but they really miss it, so they might take an opportunity to revive their art on you. As it happened, and as Christine's book so brilliantly points out, the Borneo tribes people were more than happy to assist the Australians overnight in becoming what Tom Harrison, a very strange character who ran a lot of the Dayak operations, termed a tiny army of the brave. They were brilliant. One of their weapons of choice was the blowpipe. Unbelievably effective. They'd found this sap in the middle of the island, literally 2 drops of which could kill you in about 30 seconds. It was virtually pure strychnine. And they'd go thump with this 6-foot-long bit of hollowed out bamboo. And the beauty of a blowpipe, if you fire it at someone, they can't hear you firing. So if you miss, you just shoot again. And eventually you'll hit. If you hit someone behind there, as a lot of Japanese soldiers found out, in their thousands probably, hit someone like that from a bush a few metres away, and they were very good at concealment, about there, you were dead before you hit the ground most of the time. The story of an Australian commando experimenting with a blowpipe, scratching his finger on one of these darts, had to be hospitalised for 4 days. It's a wonderful story, and it's they found that these people were indifferent to the British, did not like the Dutch, loved the Australians, but greeted the Japanese, I think the expression I used was a dread and murderous loathing. And the best thing, they were told, oh, when it comes to fighting the Japanese, guess what? You can go headhunting again. They said, beauty! We tend to... headhunting for them, I mean, it's all very gory. There was a lot more to it. There was a ritualistic, cultural, atavistic sort of aspect to headhunting and all that kind of thing going back. But the Japanese found out, well, they actually didn't find out because they concealed themselves from the Japanese so well, but also concealed the Australians helping and training them. And they were natural soldiers. There's one platoon commander went in there and they didn't speak English, but he got one bloke next to him, so I want you to form up in lines. And these two people that never formed like that, 80 of them just perfect grid, saluted, stood to attention. One lesson, how to stand at ease, like that. He said the most amazing soldiers he's ever met in his life, and fearless. Here is yes, this is one of the clandestine operations. You can see an Australian commando there doing some work there on one of the river boats there. Let's talk about why it was such a sad campaign, because I think we're nearly at the end of it here. I'm going to wrap up in a sec. This man, who knows who this man is? Call out anyone? Diver. What a bloke. I love this man. I'm still upset at what happened to him, but what happened to him? One of Australia's greatest soldiers, a humane soldier, not to the enemy. Well, he actually was to the enemy in Europe, in the Middle East. Adored his men adored him. He collected butterflies. He wrote poetry, some of the other things I quite like about him, but a formidable and fearless soldier from South Australia. Won the Victoria Cross at Shaggy Ridge, I think Shaggy Ridge, or was it Saddleburg? Which one was it? Shaggy Ridge, I think. In a year or so earlier on the north coast of New Guinea, by simply not permitting 3 Japanese pillboxes to assault his men with machine gun fire, and so he charged them himself, killed everyone in them, and said, right, off we go. And oh, thanks, Diver, that was handy. Gave him the VCC for it, and rightly so. Had a premonition that he was not going to be coming back from Borneo when he was sent there, and sadly it proved to be correct. On Tarakan, a week or so after the invasion, when the battle devolved to these night actions where the Japanese could have no chance of taking on the Australians in daytime, they became superb night fighters. Australians were astonished at how the Japanese could see in the dark. They never got their heads around it. It's like they had this sixth sense. And they had hardly any weapons too, because they often used spears and things like that, the Japanese in Borneo. Diver was with his section, and he was right at the front, and they didn't know where they were. They were on a ridge. There was a couple of other ridges in the dark. They said, look, we'll deal with this in the morning. Let's just go to bed. And we're going to stay here because the Japanese might attack. And it was right near the Tarakan airstrip, and there's a lovely moment before things got going badly. These people trying to repair that airstrip, they had the PA system, and someone brought a record player, and they could hear Bing Crosby's I'm Dreaming of a White Christmas wafting up from the airstrip, and all the guys along the ridges started softly humming White Christmas in their pits facing the Japanese in this jungle hellhole. About 2 a.m, there was a burst of machine gun fire suddenly and close. They didn't know where it came from, but somewhere up ahead. It was often a precursor to a night attack. And then Tom Derrick did something inexplicably stupid. He stood up. He stood up and wandered up a couple of metres over to the ridge just to see if he could see where it was coming from. He must have been half asleep or something. And of course, there was another burst of machine gun fire from the same pillbox that went through him and pierced him with 6 rounds of ammunition. He fell over. Then all hell broke loose. It was indeed a precursor to an attack. The Japanese swarmed forward, rattling their tins with their bugles, screaming Australian obscenities. It was all on for young and old. Like most of these Japanese attacks, they were fended off. Derrick was taken back. He kind of knew he knew he was going to die, and the next 12 hours is such a poignant story. He was tidying up the end of his life. He he was a fan of the Richmond Football Club, and he said, "Oh, can you arrange for someone to return my season ticket that they've given me, and give this to my wife, and oh, look, I've got some money with the South Australian Building Corporation. Could you just make sure that..." Totally calm with his end. His battalion commander, 2nd, 10th, name escapes me, he made his way from the HQ down the bottom of the hill. He came up when he heard, because the word went through that Diver was mortally wounded, and a pall of grief descended over everyone. Even people who didn't know him were crying, so upset that this brave warrior, this gentle warrior, who was so good to his own people, and even to an extent the enemy when they surrendered, he was very decent to them, had been hit in this tail-end campaign at the end of the war. His battalion commander came up to his stretcher, and Diver said, "Oh, what are you doing here, sir?" And he said, "Oh, I'd just like to have a chat with you, Tom." And they chatted for a minute, and Tom said, "Look, I want to talk to my padre now. Can you..." And he said, "Yes, of course, mate." And the colonel stepped back and saluted him, and Diver was taken down. He died that night in hospital. The doctors tried 2 operations to fix him, but his liver was shot to pieces. Poor Diver Derek. War's an awful bloody thing. Oh, where's his funeral? There it is. There's his funeral a couple of days after. The other VC, this fellow, though, survived. Les Starcevich. What a story. Les Starcevich was of West Australian. He came from a place called Grass Patch, Western Australia, right near Kalgoorlie, I think it is. Quiet-spoken young man of Serbian origin, and highly intelligent, again quite artistic. He used to do drawings and paintings and things like that. There was one point where the Japanese were getting the ascendancy. They did get the ascendancy on a number of occasions on each of the 3 OBOE campaigns, and pushed the Australians back, and the Australians were very, very thrown. There was one of the final engagement, they sprung an absolutely spectacularly successful ambush on an entire Matilda tank squadron of 6 tanks that were forced to just basically retreat and leave the Japanese to it and then go around them. Diver Derek's platoon, though, was on its way to assist another platoon that was cut off. And in between the cut-off platoon and Les's platoon was a series of very well-positioned Japanese machine gun nests. They emerged onto a track, a little bit of a clearing. I think it was sago forest they were emerging out on, and the bit had been cleared. And as soon as these Australians emerged, machine guns were cutting the jungle all around them. They were stuck and couldn't move. Everyone was on the ground. Everyone was they'd been lying down for like an hour. Commanding officer said, we can't go forward and we can't go back. We're about to be surrounded ourselves. And the Bren gun carrier right up forward, who was basically lying on the ground, remember seeing a pair of boots beside him, like he was lying down, and he was on the ground and just saw a pair of boots, and he looked up, and it was Les, right at the junction where you came into the clearing in full view of the Japanese. And Les says, "Oh, mate, can I borrow that Bren gun for a bit?" And he says, "Sure." Les Starcevich and a few people witnessed it, and those who witnessed it never forgot the sight. He walked along this track and began opening fire. The Japanese opened fire too. He simply walked up to one Japanese gun in placement, killed 3 people, walked up to another one, killed those, and walked up to another Japanese gun in placement and killed those as well. Don't think the Japanese weren't firing at him through all this, because they were. For some reason, not one single bullet hit this young man. The situation was completely reversed. There was no opposition. The platoon moved forward in silence, stunned silence, and he was completely unmoved by it. He went back to his place in the middle of the platoon as it advanced forward. They managed to relieve the other platoon. No, before they got to the other platoon, about 2 miles down the track, he came to another series of Japanese machine gun posts, and he did it again. And another occasion where not one single bullet hit him. He never spoke about it much after the war. He was given an immediate Victoria Cross, and everybody who was there said he deserved it 10 times over. He should have got an immediate bar to his Victoria Cross. Look, In terms of casualties, the Borneo campaign in military terms wasn't huge. Around 600 young Australian men were killed in action in Borneo. It might not sound like a lot. Put 600 young men into a hall. Looks like a lot of people, doesn't it? There are 600 grieving widows, parents, partners, children whose lives would never be the same. Of course, we know what happened in August. The 2 atomic bombs were dropped. Nobody expected that to happen. The plans were for the war, I should have said this earlier, the plans were for the war to extend well into 1946, because as we know, the several Japanese invasions of the Japanese homelands were mooted, one for November, then another one for January, etc., etc. All that was, of course, circumvented by the dropping of the atomic bombs in the first week of August, leading to the surrender on the deck of the Missouri yesterday, 80 years ago. The other thing that's overshadowed this whole campaign, and I just have to say one word, Sandakan. And we all know what that was, and it was happening not quite concurrently, but earlier in the same part of the world in northern Borneo, the dreadful death march, the murder of thousands of Australian and Commonwealth prisoners of war, a shocking war crime that still shudders people, including myself, when I think about it. Now, these guys didn't know, of course, anything about this when they were conducting the OBOE operations to liberate the people of Borneo from years of dreadful Japanese occupation. The war wound up, 600 killed and about 1,200 injured. I will come back to the very first words of the book to tie up here. The first words of my book are, I met Bruce Ruxton just once. The encounter was not a pleasant one. The story is very, very briefly, Bruce and I were on an ABC radio quiz, live radio quiz in the 1990s. This is after he'd stopped being the very controversial and outspoken president of the Victorian RSL, kind of a conservative right-wing warrior before right-wing warriors were 10 a penny, but Bruce was out there all by himself. A lot of people didn't like him. I thought he was all right. I thought he was rather funny. He was a wonderful performer. He was a very good actor, actually. But anyway, we were on this quiz. It was all very grumpy. Wasn't very satisfying. It was a quiz. We were on two teams on Australian military history. It was a cold winter's night. We all wrapped up. The audience dribbled out. There's hardly anyone, less people than here, I can assure you. We lost the quiz by 2 points, and Bruce didn't talk to me much. And for some reason, as we were packing up, I turned to Bruce and said, Bruce, I read that you went to shore at Balikpapan. And he stopped and he turned to me and he said, how the hell did you know that? I said, well, I just read it and I know it was the last thing that we did. And he kind of started, I was talking and you look at him with these piercing blue eyes. And he said, come over here and have a chat. And as the ABC crew are packing up around us, we spent the next hour and a half talking. We actually went into another room and spoke, and he's told me about his experiences. And he became a totally different person. He became a soft person and a very nice person. And he told me about what it was like coming back. He was one of these fellows that was a green soldier. He'd been trained as a surveyor, but they drafted him into the army and as an infantryman. Because he was because he was last in, he was last out. So he stayed in Balikpapan. He went on to become part of the British Commonwealth Occupation Forces in Japan after the war, Bruce. But on Balikpapan, he said it was horrible. Even though I didn't see a lot of the fighting, the people on Tarakan had a shocking time. The things the Japanese did to the civilians, he saw bayoneted women, they uncovered American airmen who'd been decapitated and things like that. The fighting was horrible. And then to come back from that to an Australia that was so utterly disinterested in what had happened. And part of his bitterness, I think, was shared by many of the Australian soldiers who'd been to Borneo. The last great thing that we did, because we were ordered to do it, and by God we did it, we did with efficiency and bravery. And we came back to a country that was saturated by war. Everyone, you can understand, everyone was sick of it. The Borneo battles didn't even make the front pages of the paper. They were buried on page 5 and 6. What was happening up in Balikpapan was, you could read about who was winning the Melbourne Cup on front page, but in are we still fighting up there? They're the sort of questions that people like Bruce Ruxton came back to. Yeah, we are fighting. I know people that were killed up there. Oh, really? I didn't know that. Oh, because the war was over by this time. So they kind of shut up about it, more than a lot of veterans shut up about it. The veterans came back from the Second World War and the First, Vietnam probably too, were told to basically shut up about it. No one's going to understand what you've been through. Get on with it. Get on with your lives. Pretend it never happened. Well, all very well, but we know now that the human psyche does not work that way, and trauma stays and manifests and becomes a living beast in a lot of veterans' minds, and that's the things that we continue to fail to understand and appreciate it, and by God we should, because I do not want to, and I don't want my sons to have to go and do what these people do, and I'm so enormously grateful for these fellows in Borneo and the other campaigns we fought off in these and other wars that did it for us. So that's what Borneo was like. Was it a waste of time? It depends who you talk to. It depends who you talk to. Wasn't a waste of time, and I'll read you the last thing. And I try to end with a bit of an up note, because a lot of the soldiers who were there were so gratefully received by the local people in Borneo. And they'd been through hell these last 5 or 6 years at the brutality of the Japanese, the sadism of the Japanese, the unnecessary, inexplicable brutality that served no purpose whatsoever. That's what gets me. I'll just read you the very last piece of the book. In a post-war interview, Arthur Newton, a staff captain at the 24th Infantry Brigade headquarters, which fought on Labuan during OBOE 6, acknowledged that much of what he had said over the past years, questioning the justification for OBOE, was indeed true. This is in a post-war interview. In the same breath, however, he added that for the most of his life, he would be warmed by the memory of the joy and relief he witnessed in the faces of the Borneo people, whom he and his fellow Australians had released from the tyranny of years of Japanese occupation. Quote, "The thing that gets me every now and then, again, is the criticism that there was no need for the Australians to go into Borneo in any shape or form, and that it was just a waste of men's lives. But on the other hand, it was the only part of the war where we felt we had helped somebody other than ourselves." I've gone on too long. Thank you so much for listening. It's been lovely to talk to you. I'm so happy that you've come out today. I'll go to the bookshop and sign some books if you want one. Thanks a lot.
Cheers, thank you very much for that, Michael. That was a tour de force, and it's always very challenging to cover 3 campaigns in just a little bit over 30 minutes. It was really great. Thank you very much. We have gone over, but I'm sure everyone would like to ask a question or two. So we do have 2 roaming mics. So if you don't mind, though, please keep your questions succinct and your answers succinct as well.
Oh, yeah. Questions, answers, comments? Yeah, yes, sir. If you've got a big voice, you can shout. Oh, do we have a roving mic?
Mic's
on
its way.
Yeah. How long? About just under an hour?
Yeah, you can.
G'day, Michael. Bob.
Hi.
Michael Bob Curtis.
Hello, Bob.
Thank you very much for a fantastic presentation.
Oh, you're very kind. Thank you.
Putting the retrospectoscope on, given had the atomic bombs not been dropped and we'd gone in as an invasion, considering Mountbatten was just about to invade Malaya and retake that almost at the same time as this has happened, had those things happened, do you think we'd have a different appreciation of OBOE?
Yes, I really think so. It would have given it so much context. What happened to the Malayan invasion? Did it actually take place?
It went in immediately after VP Day as an occupation force.
Yes, that's right. It was, absolutely. I mean, the thing is about undertaking these military operations. It's so much about context, isn't it? everybody believed that the Japanese were evil, and they basically were. Imperial Japan was terrible, and these places deserved to have our people go in and liberate the people. A lot of people didn't think beyond that. Like, oh well, it's there. The Japanese are there. We've got soldiers. We'll send them in. Of course, things then started to happen around the Borneo campaign. Everything kind of fell away. The war kind of stopped around them. If the war had kept going, it would have been viewed in a different light. If we'd had to have done this again and again and again, if the bombs hadn't been dropped, and who knows what would have happened, it would be seen in the context of one of the final steps towards Japan. But as the great historian Peter Stanley, who I relied on enormously on this book, said, it particularly Tarakan was a stepping stone. They were told this is going to be a stepping stone. Then it became a stepping stone to nowhere. Context is everything. And as we say, hindsight is always viewed in 20/20 vision. Thanks, Bob.
Thank you.
You gentlemen next up. Anybody else? No? Fine. You can come and talk to me after if you like. I'm going to have a chat in the bookshop. Okay, I think we might be done. Yep, thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, thank you again, Michael. That's a fantastic presentation. Thank you for attending, joining us this afternoon for this presentation. It's been great. Learned a lot about Borneo. As we mentioned before, Michael's books are available for purchase in the shop, as well as a signature. So please pick up a copy on your way out.
And I'm going to go there and sign them now.
Yes, give him like 2-minute head start. But I hope to see everyone back here again in another fortnight's time for our next talk. We'll have a fantastic Canberra-based historian talking about SOE operations in Thailand in December 1941, and then there'll be another author's talk in conversation event, actually with Christine Halliwell, in October. So please check our socials, and I hope to see you again soon. So thank you, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Thank you.